Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Perashat class. Perashat Shelah, Shelah Lecha Anashim, highlighted by the debacle of the Het HaMeragelim, the sin of the spies, which prevented most of the generation from entering Eretz Yisrael and laid the groundwork for the worst day on our calendar, the most tragic day on our calendar, that is Tisha B'Av. In the aftermath of that parasha, we find other subject matters, and that brings us to our question of the day, and that is, how does the tzitzit and the mizvav wearing tzitzit aid every single Jew, man and woman alike, become subjugated servants of God? And we find, after this event of Het HaMeragelim, the sin of the spies, a few different parashiyot, many subjects. One could ask what the connection is and why any of them are doing there, but we see a common thread in the first, you can say, three of them. They all deal with coming to the land. In other words, laws that are dependent upon being in the land of Israel, and that is somewhat of a comfort, even to that generation, and certainly, whether you were going not to make it through, like the older people in that generation, 20 and above, or even those who were going to make it through, and certainly to us looking in retrospect and being informed by God that the promise is still there, the covenant is still there, we still merit the redemption and the entering and the owning the land, the holy land of Israel. Okay, so that very much can be an explanation for those paragraphs which began, Ki tabo el ha'ares, el eres Moshe botechem, when you come to the land that you will settle. Then there was an incident, which we're not going to analyze today, and that's the incident of the Mekoshesh Esim, which is a event that happened in the desert when someone was Mehalel Shabbat, gathered wood, and there are different opinions as to what he violated, and subsequently, Moshe Rabbeinu was told by Hashem, after not being sure what the punishment should be, that indeed it's a punishment of Sekilah, stoning. And then the parasha ends with a paragraph that we all know by heart. Men, women alike. The reason that we know it by heart is because the third paragraph in Kiryat Shema. And it's a paragraph that we know as the one of tzitzit, because it mentions the mizvav tzitzit, and we're holding the tzitzit, and we're kissing the tzitzit, right? But it's also, of course, the third paragraph of the three of Kiryat Shema. And it's all but 5 pesukim. If you subtract the generic V'yomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, the topic matter is all but 4 pesukim. The first thing that behooves us to ask is, what is it doing in this parasha? How did it find its way over here? But there's a lot more to ask. So I think what we'll do first is, let's just look at this paragraph, this parasha, so to speak, in the context of Kiryat Shema. In other words, we know that the Torah Kedosha commanded us to read Kiryat Shema. The first paragraph, Shema Yisrael in Parashat Vayet Hanan, it says within that paragraph, V'dibarta bam, right? You should speak about this very, and it says the word should be Hayom al lebabecha. This paragraph is a constant, it's a daily recitation. Additionally, the next parasha, Eked, speaks about V'hayim Shema Tishmi'u, and repeats some of the same terminologies, or utters and echoes some of the same terminologies in Shema Yisrael. And for that reason, we know, embedded in the parasha itself, that we must read it every day. Twice a day, we call it Kiryat Shema Shacharit and Kiryat Shema Arbi. The truth is that Vayomer, the parasha of Vayomer, the parasha of Tzitzit, is not the fulfillment of a mizvah of the Torah. Hachamim added it in, primarily because of its last pasuk, seemingly, which is Ani Adonai Elohim, Asher Asiti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim, V'yolachem Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohim, because it mentions Yetziat Mitzrayim. We have a mizvah to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim, according to some, it's a positive commandment even on a daily basis. to mention and think about and remember the Exodus of Egypt and all the events that came with it. So that is the primary reason, seemingly, why Hachamim added that paragraph. But it doesn't seem to match up with the first two paragraphs. And the content itself of the rest of the paragraph, besides Yetziat Mitzrayim, how does that measure up? How does it match? How does it align with the first two paragraphs? What is it doing there? So the Hachamim and the Gemara, Masechet Berachot, do go through two different theories as really to the order of the three parashiot. Shema, V'haya, Vayomer. One reason given for the order is that Shema is Kavalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven, primary spirit and theme of the paragraph. V'haya is Ol Mizvot, accepting the yoke of Mizvot. And Vayomer is also, but the Gemara says, V'haya applies all day, and Vayomer, because the Mizvah focus only applies in the day and not the night, and therefore it's third. There's another reason given for the hierarchy and the order of these three parashiot, and that is regarding Torah itself. The first paragraph of Shema deals with Lilmod Lamed La'asot, learn, teach, and perform Torah. Second paragraph, V'haya, we won't bring the proofs and the pesukim that demonstrate this, but we'll trust the Gemara for now. Deals only with Lelamed and La'asot, to teach Torah and to perform Mitzvot. And the last paragraph of Vayomer does not address learning or teaching Torah, only La'asot, only doing Mitzvot. And indeed, the Rambam, when he speaks of the obligation to say Kriyat Shema in the third paragraph by Vayomer, he doesn't really speak of the reason of reciting that last pasuk, which mentions Yetziat Mitzrayim. Instead, he says, this paragraph is there to help us remember all the mitzvot. As it says in the parasha itself, you shall see it, uritem oto, and meaning to see, as we know every day that we say it, you remember all the mitzvot, you'll perform them. The Kesef Mishneh points out, commentary, that's Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo, of course, commenting on the Rambam, on that law, and he said, the reason the Rambam says this is that you shouldn't think that the pasuk of Yetziat Mitzrayim is the only reason that it's there. And if it were only to be for that last pasuk of the paragraph, we would not have combined this paragraph of Vayomer to the first two paragraphs of Shema and V'haya. And therefore, the Rambam teaches us that the critical function and objective of this paragraph is just that. It's remembering mitzvot. And somehow the ingredients and the instructions and the ideas in this paragraph is there to do something that somehow Shema Yisrael paragraph and V'haya Shemoah paragraph couldn't do. Only this paragraph, combined with the Mizvah B'sisit, somehow is going to carry out the task and be what provides the critical function of having us remember Mizvot and being committed to the carrying out and fulfillment of Mizvot. That's a tremendous statement, but it's based on the Gemara. And in another Gemara, Masechet Berachot, a couple of pages beforehand, Gemara lists and it asks, why is Perashat Sisit, the paragraph of Sisit as it's called, established to be a daily recitation? It says Rabbi Yehuda bar Habibah because it has Shisha Devarim. It has 6 concepts or ideas in it, and he names them. One is the Mizvah Sisit. Second is the mentioning of the Yetziat Mitzrayim, Exodus from Egypt. Third is all Mizvot, accepting the responsibility to fulfill Mizvot. Fourth is Da'at Minim, the idea of heretical thoughts and ideas, and of course, straying from them. Hidhurei Avirah, thoughts of sin, and Hidhurei Avodah Zarah, thoughts of Avodah Zarah, and of course, refraining and protecting ourselves from all of that. 6 ideas, says the Gemara, and really based on those thoughts will be the commentaries that we see as we go into this paragraph, and really that's going to lead into the punchline of what we're trying to get to in this class. So let's look at the paragraph itself. Now that we understand it in the context of reciting it on a daily basis, in Kriyat Shema. So it starts off simply by talking about the mizvah of sisit. It will be al kanfei bichdehem, on the four corners if you have a four-cornered garment, and you have to put on it a pitil techelet, a string of techelet, which is a certain royal blue color, naturally colored. In other words, a natural dye which colors the material of the string of the sisit will be one of the strings. It'll be wrapped around it. As we know, Hachamim tell us the dorotam for generations is the whiteness of the sisit. If you can't find the dye of techelet, which we're told by the Hachamim was extracted from the species called the helazon, fish, a snail, it's not ledorotam. That's not a mizvah. You can still fulfill the mizvah without it, as we've done for many centuries. Today's discoveries is a whole new topic matter. In any case, that's that pasuk. The next pasuk, out of the four critical pasukim, all of a sudden reaches a topic and a function of this sisit, and that is, again, we recite this, we know this like we know our last names, but maybe we don't think about it enough. So let's think. You shall see it. Look at the garment. No, really, look at the sisit, which is the 8 strings and the 5 knots and the way they're wrapped. You'll not only remember the mitzvot when you look at it, but you'll perform them. Somehow, the activity of looking at these sisit will help you perform a mitzvot. And not only that, not only that, you shouldn't and you won't, therefore, follow your heart and your eyes to which you stray, or after which you stray. And then lema'an tizkiru, in order to remember and perform all my mitzvot. Seems a little repetitive. And you be sanctified to God. And then the final pasuk is, I am God who took you out of Mitzrayim to be your God. So let's go back to our original question. And that is there a reason, and obviously there is, and probably more than one, that this finds itself, this paragraph, the Mizvah Sisit, and this paragraph which surrounds it, which revolves around it, finds itself at the end of our parasha of Shelah Lecha, which is highlighted by the Meraglim. And the answer is very obvious, because you don't have to go further than just looking at words and terminologies and roots to see the fact that the second pasuk in our parasha was a order from Hashem, Shelach lecha anashim v'yaturu et eretz Canaan. Send men, prestigious men, v'yaturu, and they shall spy, seek, engage in an espionage mission, discover. V'yaturu simply is translated as spying for the most part, in the land of Canaan, which is Eretz Yisrael. V'yaturu. And then, on the third to last pasuk of this parasha, speaking about sisit, it says, Velo taturu, you shall not fill in the blinds. Lo taturu, after your heart and your eyes. There is no coincidence here. Absolutely not. The bookends of this parasha is latur, viaturu, and lo taturu, obviously. So this is not a eureka discovery that I just made. This is obvious. And the fact that both words are used, and the fact that it definitely means spies to start the parasha, we don't have to dig down too deeply to assume that that same reflection of the idea, at least, of spying, seeking, and discovering with perhaps our minds and our eyes, which is what the tools that spies use, is also embedded in the meaning of that pasuk, and therefore has something to do with sisit, or at least from the things that sisit protects you. So let's try to understand whys. So here we are. We have this Mizvah Sisi, intricate Mizvah. There are chapters in Shulchan Aruch and many laws which detail the instructions and the various obligations of tying the tzitzit, of wearing the tzitzit, etc., etc. But once you have a final product, whatever opinion you follow, whatever custom you have the tzitzit. Common denominator in all opinions is 8 strings, there's 5 knots. And ideally, if you have the techelet, that blue, royal blue color present, you have one of the strings, just wrap through it with that color. You've seen that color pops around, you know what it looks like, you know what a tzitzit looks like. And the Torah tells us, wear it, see it, remember all the mitzvot, and then somehow protect yourself. Refrain from that which you stray after your eyes and your heart, which you are zonim. Zonim. The root word of that is pretty difficult, right? And that always connotes some type of straying, and a negative one, not a positive one, diverting from the proper path. So let's work backwards. Let's first understand the dangers from which you see is supposed to be protecting you. What is this lo taturu? Don't spy, so to speak. Don't follow. Don't take the lead of your heart, which really means your mind, your intellect, of your thoughts, and anechem, in your eyes. What is this referring to? Simply, the simple way to see this is that, of course, your eyes is your mind, your heart rather is your mind, your thought process, the things that you think about, which really includes a man's natural desires, which are triggered by what he thinks about, and anechem, what he sees. And there's prohibitions of what we are allowed to see because of that, what we're allowed to think about. And that, of course, is dangerous. That leads to sin. Which you stray sometimes wrongfully with your mind and your eyes, and that leads you to sin. As Rashi famously says, based on the Hachamim, based on the Midrash, in that pasuk, he says that 2 sentiments by Hachamim. One of them is that the eyes and the mind are miragilim laguf, midrash tanchuma, are the spies of the body, right? In other words, body, do you want to know what you're able to do, what you may want to do next, what's coming up, what I suggest? Let me take you on the tour. Let me take you on the tour. Your mind, your thought process, your eyes might then predict, motivate, and activate the activities of your body. And based on that, Rashi brings another sentiment, and that is, based on that midrash, misarsilim lo et ha'avirot. So is a broker. And he calls the eyes and the mind the brokers of sin. You know, a broker is a middleman. A broker makes a deal. A broker brings 2 parties together. And he says, ha'ayin ro'ah, this became a famous statement. Ha'ayin ro'ah ve'haleb chomed, the eyes see, and the heart or the mind desires. In other words, the eyes see something, it then is registered as our thought process. Ve'haguf oseh ta'avera, and the body then carries out the sin. Like a camera takes a picture, registers it in the database, and that all of a sudden becomes the inspiration, the negative inspiration, albeit, and the motivation to then carry it out. The brokers of sin, they make the deal between the person, the body, and the sin that's just waiting to be engaged in. The brokers of that sin are the mind and the eyes. Beyond that, as we just saw from the Gemara, embedded also in these words, libabchem and einechem, are sinful thoughts that are sinful in and of themselves, not just the thought of doing a sin, And also specifically, as the Gemara pointed out, heretical thoughts that in which we question God. And now we're talking about, not talking about discovery of God. It's a process that people have to go through. But they're cynical thoughts, they're heretical thoughts of denial, and that means that we come to conclusions that we actually live with and are okay with, and becomes part of our persona and our mindset and our faith, so to speak. Heretical thoughts in terms of our belief in God, in terms of, as the Gemara said, avodah zarah, and those are thoughts asher zuim acharehem, which we certainly stray. Like the woman zonah, that is also the part of the root of that word. We stray very much in that thought process, and a person could lose, God forbid, his portion in olam haba just because of his mindset. Embedded in that is that as well. So we have the dangers here from which the seed is supposed to protect us. Are the physical dangers from which our eyes and mind are the brokers, and also the intellectual, conceptual dangers in terms of our anti-God thoughts, our heretical and counter-Torah thought process. All of that is supposed to be our little own seat, assigned as our guard. How is that? So we have the two famous, more well-known sentiments. One of them is quoted by Rashi. Many of the Mefarshim quoted a famous Midrash in Gemara. You see. What do you see? Well, the most well-known is that you see its color, techelet. And techelet reminds you of the sea, which is a royal type of blue. And then you continue as the sea meets the horizon, and that brings you toward the sky. And then the sky, as you look higher in the horizon, reminds you of the Kiseh HaKavod, the throne of God. And somehow, because of the color and the sea, seemingly you're supposed to think of God and then be protected from the sins. But Rashi also brings down a gematria, numerical value. Sisit is 600 plus 8 strings plus 5 nouns to 613. You look at it, you remember all the mitzvot. The Ramban does not like that because Sisit in the Torah is without a yod and other reasons that he brings. And therefore, some don't subscribe to that gematria as a numerical value formulation. There's more depth. There has to be more depth. There has to be more to it that the Sisit brings to the table that helps us remember. And indeed, we see the Mefarshim going at it with all type of in-depth discussions about the Sisit, about the blueness, and about the idea of the sea, sky, and throne of God. For two examples. One is the Kli Yakar, and he speaks of the fact, based on the Midrash, that there's an obedience factor here of the sea and the sky, and that the sea is obedient to God and performs his will. It's part of the laws of nature, but does it out of fear. How do we know that? The sea is always trying to escape. You see those waves crashing, the tide going in and out. Get me out of here, says the sea. But you know what? At the end, it changes its mind. Out of fear, it obeys God. The sky has no limits. And the sky is already out there. And yet the sky continues to obey God. Sky represents, of course, out of space, celestial being, the massive universe, limitless universe of ours, ever-expanding universe. And it obeys God, nevertheless, out of love, out of ahava. And you see the color, reminds you of that sea that is obedient and subjugates itself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu out of fear, which reminds you of the sky, which subjugates itself to the higher level, the highest mode of relationship we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with our God, and that's ahava, love of God. And that, why is that so much greater than fear? Because that reminds you of Kiseh HaKavod, the throne of God, and the fact that only love can bring the ultimate connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One idea, that's the seat. You look at it, reminds you, and you are awe-inspired. You're gripped with a feeling of of love and subjugation to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Why would I stray out of with my eyes and my heart? And that brings us to Sforno. And with that, we will try to solve all questions and wrap up this discussion. The Sforno says as follows. He says, well, first of all, let's talk about the actual Tzitzit. You see it. What do you see? Very simple. You see a royal blue. You see a royal blue. You see the type of blue that was cloaked the kings and the great prestigious leaders of the past. And you think of the fact that I have a king with whom I have entered into a covenant and a promise and a swear and obligation that I give you life and I exalt you from the nations and promise you eternal reward. You subject yourself to my mizvot. I see that blue and I recall the fact that I have a king. He's royal and I'm bound to him and I am fortunate. I am forever connected to him and my life is subservient to my God. And that overrides my desires, that overrides my animalistic tendencies, my divinity, my godliness, my angelic existence must overcome my tendencies, my physical and intellectual tendencies to stray from my God. And so while you have that juxtaposed idea of tzitzit, which represents that power of subservience versus those draws, those tendencies, those desires, both physical and intellectual, that's the seat and that moment of tension, that remembrance will dominate, will overcome. It will subdue and it will dominate those desires, physical and intellectual. That is an unbelievable idea. But then comes the next pasuk. So that you should remember and perform all my mizvot. And here, in the most profound way, continues Sforno, and he says as follows. He says that once that exercise is over, and you've used the tzitzit to remember, you put yourself in check, you've given yourself perspective on life, what it's all about, and who God is to me, and how petty sinfulness is, and ridiculous and illogical it is. Now what happens is, you are, he calls pinuyim. You're cleared from all the thoughts, from the desires. And once you are cleared from all that, once you're saved, once you're spared, you're home free. Lehavdil, it's a wide receiver with an open field, running to the end zone with nothing stopping him, with no impediments. Now, which really is a thought that should resonate with us. And that is that as human beings, yes, we're wired to follow our humanness and to be sometimes animalistic and sometimes stray intellectually. Our really default existence is to cling to God. But what happens is the obstacles, the impediments. The tzitzit is there to remove our natural humanness. That's the negative part of our humanness, both physically and intellectually, and then bring us back to our default existence. And our default existence is clearing all impediments, overcoming all obstacles, and getting back to our natural selves, which is remembering what everything is about. The ma'an tizkiru, and then we're home free. The end zone is there. V'asitem et kol misvotai. The power of the tzitzit, ending with the last pasuk, which is, I am God who took you out of Egypt just for this very reason. So you can subjugate yourself to me, and I can be your God, and you can be my people. And with that, this parasha started with the spies who followed Taturu. They didn't only spy the land, but they allowed the spies of their minds and their hearts and their eyes to lead them into disaster. Ends with the spies that if we use the power of tzitzit, can be subdued, and we can then subjugate ourselves and bring us back to our natural state our default existence and clear the way for being Avdei Hashem and subject to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and only keeping his mitzvot, and therefore the power of the Sisit and the last paragraph of Kiryat Shema. Amen.